you very much. Thank you very much for giving me a little bit of time. I'm going to talk about optimism today. Optimism is something that's very near and dear to my heart. It's something that has shaped my life in pretty profound ways, I think. And since we have the title slide up here, I want to start with the word power, because optimism is a profoundly powerful thing. But any profoundly powerful thing can be used for both destructive purposes and constructive purposes. And that might sound a little odd to you, that something as seemingly benign as optimism can be destructive. And so I want to make sure that we distinguish what type of optimism we're talking about here. And the destructive type of optimism, in my view, is blind optimism. Blind optimism is optimism where people take problems, challenges, and minimize them. They rationalize them in such a way that even things that are downright evil are viewed as good. In the best of circumstances, I think that kind of optimism in people is downright annoying, and in the worst of circumstances, it's downright dangerous. So that's not the kind of optimism I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is optimism that is empowering. Optimism that allows you to look at a particular situation, evaluate what aspects of that situation you can control and what things you can't control. Accept those things you can control and try to do something with the best of hopes to accomplishing something great, either in a personal life, a community, or even such that you can change the world. So what I want to do in the few minutes we have together is I want to talk to you a little bit about why optimism is so important to me, how I came to be, I think, an optimistic person. I want to talk a little bit about a few stories from early childhood, if you don't mind me indulging in that. And I want to talk about 4 strategies that I use to maintain optimism in my life. Maybe not so much maintain the optimism, but at least fend off the pessimism that seems to be inundating this world. We live in a very cynical times, really. And sometimes the only way to be optimistic is to try to insulate yourself, at least to some extent, from negativity. And we'll talk about some strategies. I'm going to focus on 2. I actually use 4. I'll mention all 4. So let's get started. When I was a kid, when I was 4 years old, my mother bought my sister and I, she was a year and a half or so, our first dog, Basset Hound. Still my favorite breed of dog, those sad eyes, those long ears. I love Basset Hounds. But the interesting thing about this particular dog and why I bring it up at this point is not because of the dog itself, but because of the interesting name that my mom named her. And she named this dog Pollyanna. Now, some of you may know that term. This is the pretty typical definition, an excessively cheerful or optimistic person. Okay, some people have described me that way. And when I started thinking about this talk, I thought I might cheat a little bit and do a little bit of revisionist history and tell you that my mom bought this dog. It sort of foreshadowed this dominant personality trait that her then 4-year-old son would have during his life. But, well, full disclosure, it's not exactly how it happened. She actually named the dog after her favorite board game, Pollyanna, variant of Parcheesi. Some of you may remember it. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Pollyanna was actually taken off the market the year I was born. I don't know if that's a coincidence. But we can still look at a link between this little dog of mine and optimism, because it turns out that Pollyanna, the board game, was named after a fictional book. Actually, it was a series of books that were first published in 1913 by Eleanor Porter, and the title character was Pollyanna. There were a series of books and a series of films that were made, and it was kind of considered a classic of children's literature. And the main theme of these books is that Pollyanna is a very optimistic person. In fact, her dad taught her what he called the glad game. And I think the glad game is something that optimists do even subconsciously. And what the glad game is you look at any situation that you find yourself in, and you find at least one thing about that situation that makes you glad. And one of the themes of the books and the films was that it exemplified one of the true powers of optimism, and that's extremely contagious. And so what would happen in these various storylines with Pollyanna is that she would exude this optimism that was incessant and it would have this contagious effect, and it would spread, and all of a sudden, her little community was a happier place. Okay, so why me? Why am I such a glass is always half full kind of guy? Another story. I'm going to keep going back to my mom. Isn't it amazing the profound impact that our mothers and our parents can have on us? One thing that my mom used to do when I was also very young, and I'm so grateful to her for this to this very day, is she read to me a lot. And for some reason, she's not a scientist, but she read to me a lot about science. And I credit that and one other thing that I'm going to tell you in a minute about my lifelong passion for science. I absolutely love science. I love sharing stories about science. I like to talk about science. In fact, I didn't want to make this a scientific talk, because there's no way I could do that in 18 minutes. No possible way. So she started talking to me about, or reading to me about astronomy, and I love astronomy. So I'm going to take you down a little minor astronomical detour, if you don't mind. What we have here is a picture of the so-called local group. Now, local to an astronomer and local to you and me are very, very different things. We are here. There's the Milky Way. If we got an enormous zoom lens, we might be able to find the one star, our sun, out of about 100 million or so, that where we actually live. But if you were to measure the distance of the local group, it's a ridiculously long distance. It's 11.2 million light years, which translates into 65 plus sextillion miles, and we're still in our neighborhood. Is that crazy? Let's go even further. This is one of my favorite images of all time. This is the HUDF, which stands for the Hubble Ultra Deep Field. And the way this image was produced was the Hubble Space Telescope looked at a little sliver of sky in which apparently nothing could be seen, about 1/70th the diameter of a full moon, over a period of several weeks. This is a composite image that shows amazing population all the way back to 13 billion light years. Get your mind around that. Now, astronomers argue about whether we live in an infinite universe, and I don't know if we'll ever solve that. We heard some talks earlier about how there might be some things beyond our comprehension. That might very well be one of those things. But you know what? From my minuscule little vantage point, my very, very finite world, 13 billion light years to me, it might as well be infinite. Okay. Now, I was fortunate to learn about this type of thing at a very early age because of my mother. And so it has helped shape the way I view the world. And I view the world as we are a very, very thin slice of an enormous, incomprehensible reality. We heard a little bit about incomprehensible things earlier today. But even though we know that we may never be in a position, in fact, I say we will never be in a position to know all there is to know about all of reality, what we can say is that within reality there is a very, very small fraction that entails what I know I know. Okay, really small. And I know I'm a biologist, I know a little bit about biology, that kind of thing, but there's a much bigger realm that entails what I know I don't know. I don't know how to perform open heart surgery. I hope no one here needs it today. Lots of things. All of you could probably come up with a list of things you know, things you know you don't know, but you know what? Most of reality is not accounted for yet. Most of reality is taken up by what we don't even know we don't know. Okay? So, I have resigned myself to the fact, despite the fact I love learning, I'm fortunate enough to be in an educational institution where I can learn all the time, I am never going to know everything there is to know about all the things I want to know about. So, what are we to do? What we are to do is choose. We will never know all of reality, but what we will have is a particular perspective, a particular view of reality. And I think one problem that some people have is distinguishing between what is reality and what is their particular perception of reality. Now, we're going to keep this in the context of optimism and pessimism, but of course this could be applied to many, many different things. Sometimes we choose our reality in a conscious way. Sometimes we choose them in an unconscious way. Like I said, we're inundated with negative messages. So unconscious choices, conscious choices, they're choices. Okay? So in this cynical world, does poor Pollyanna have a chance? And I like to make the case that yes, indeed, Pollyanna does. What I've been talking about so far is actually the first of the four tools that I alluded to earlier. It's perspective. Okay? I think if you have a perspective of where you are in the grand scheme of things, it can bring clarity that can allow you to make those kinds of choices a lot easier. Are you going to be an optimist? Are you going to be a cynic? What works best for you? I'm going to try to make the case that optimism, first of all, I'd highly recommend it. Optimists do live longer, they're healthier, and all kinds of things, but at least it can prove to be useful, and I think there are certain problems that require an optimistic mindset and cannot be solved without one. That's just my opinion. Okay, many different choices, optimism, pessimism, realism, and so on. Here's another story. Here is one of my scientific role models. Many people in science have been inspired by this man. He's the late, great Carl Sagan. And I want to talk to you about my very favorite Carl Sagan story. All right? In 1990, he was a member of the team that was involved in Voyager 1. Voyager 1 was a spacecraft, unmanned spacecraft that explored the outer reaches of the solar system. It had a battery that only had finite amount of power. It delivered an enormous amount of data. Incredible insights about our universe was produced because of that spacecraft. And what Dr. Sagan requested of the engineers at Jet Propulsion Laboratory is that as the battery was dying, they do one last thing that wasn't necessarily very scientifically valuable, but might have a profound impact on just people. And it certainly had a profound impact on me. And here's what he did. Voyager 1 was well past Saturn. Here's an artist's rendition of what it looked like. They turned the camera around, they turn it back to Earth, and you can barely see it. It probably need to drop the lights down a little bit, but this is the image that it produced. Okay, this is the so-called pale blue dot. He wrote a book about it, and what I'd like to do is share a brief passage that is my very favorite Carl Sagan passage, if you don't mind. All right, look at that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy, of our suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, economic doctrines, every hunter, every forager, every hero, every coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king, every peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father and hopeful child, every inventor, every explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint, every sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. The earth is a small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors so that in glory and triumph they could become momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come to save us from ourselves. The earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit? Yeah. Settle? Not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the earth is where we make our stand. Perspective is tool number one. Tool number two is gratitude. And I don't mean just thank you. I mean a deep, profound sense of gratitude that's internalized, that's part of your very being. Now, I think I have this. The very fact that I'm standing here before you today and have this opportunity to speak dwells up this intense sense of gratitude because it didn't have to be this way. You see, when I was very young, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease that nearly killed me. My parents didn't think I was going to live. I did. I'm here. I'm very grateful for that fact. I really like being alive and all that stuff. Get to do science and learn about science and learn about what Carl Sagan had to say. But it didn't have to be this way, and in some ways it feels like I'm on borrowed time. So I'm extremely grateful. But here's the point I want to make. Lots of people, we heard about in the video we saw earlier about the about the plane crash survivor was just amazing. Lots of people have encountered or have faced death and lived to talk about it, and I would postulate that most of them have this kind of gratitude that's internalized in a major way. But what I want to say is that you don't have to face something like that to have the same profound sense of gratitude that can make optimism like this possible. Here's another one of my scientific role models. This is Dr. Richard Dawkins. He's an evolutionary biologist. And I just discovered this passage of his. This is from a book called Unweaving the Rainbow. I want to share this one with you too, because this shows us that every single one of us in this room, in this world, all who have ever lived, all who will live, should have this gratitude, because we shouldn't be here either. Let me talk about why. We are going to die, and that makes us the lucky ones. Most people are never going to die because they are never going to be born. The potential people who could have been here in my place but who will in fact never see the light of day outnumber the sand grains of Sahara. Certainly those unborn ghosts include greater poets than Keats, scientists greater than Newton. We know this because the set of possible people allowed by our DNA so massively outnumbers the set of actual people. In the teeth of these stupefying odds, it is you and I, in our ordinariness, that are here. The present moves from the past to the future like a tiny spotlight, inching its way along a gigantic ruler of time. Everything behind the spotlight is darkness, the darkness of the dead past. Everything ahead of the spotlight is the darkness of the unknown future. The odds of your time being the one in the spotlight are the same as the odds of a penny tossed at random is going to hit a particular ant on a road that connects San Francisco to New York. In other words, it is overwhelmingly probable that you and I are all dead. We live on a planet that is all but perfect for our kind of life. Not too warm, not too cold, basking in kindly sunshine, softly watered, a gently springing green and gold harvest festival of a planet. Yes, and alas, there are deserts, there are slums, there is starvation, racking misery to be found, but take a look at the competition. Compared with most planets, this is paradise, and parts of Earth are still paradise by any standard. Now we're going to do a little thought experiment, if that's okay. Imagine a spaceship full of sleeping explorers, deep frozen would-be colonists of some distant world. Perhaps the ship is on a forlorn mission to save the species before an unstoppable comet like the one that killed the dinosaurs hits the home planet. The voyagers go into the deep freeze, soberly reckoning the odds against their spaceships ever chancing upon a planet friendly to life. But imagine that the ship's robot pilot turns out to be unthinkably lucky. After millions of years, the ship does find a planet capable of sustaining life. Now, we just talked about the immensity of the cosmos. So that's too much luck. That would never, ever happen. There's our astronauts. Sorry about that. But isn't that what has happened to each and every one of us? We have woken after hundreds of millions of years of sleep, defying astronomical odds. Admittedly, we didn't arrive by spaceship. We arrived by being born. And we didn't burst conscious onto the world, but accumulated awareness gradually. That shouldn't take away from the wonder of it all. After sleeping through 100 million centuries, we have finally opened our eyes on a sumptuous planet sparkling with color, bountiful with life. Within decades, we must close our eyes again. Isn't it a noble and an enlightened way of spending our brief time in the sun to work at understanding the universe and how we have come to wake up in it? This is how I answer when I am asked, as I surprisingly often am, why I bother to get up in the mornings. To put it the other way around, isn't it sad to go to your grave without ever wondering why you were born? Who, with such a thought, would not spring from bed, eager to resume discovering the world and rejoicing to be a part of it? Gratitude, tool number 2. Tool number 3, now I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to go very quickly. We all have an inner voice that sometimes can take over. We have inner voices that tells us that all things are possible. That's your optimist. We have inner voice that tells us that nothing is possible. That's our extreme pessimist. Sometimes it's in between. The key, I think, is being aware of that voice, because with awareness becomes the ability to control it. And you can help to change the voice if it is causing you distress, if it is making your life less than it could possibly be, and move it to a different voice. You have control over that voice, but unfortunately, too many of us let the voices control us. Lastly, tool number 4, embracing the givens of human existence. Okay? Too many people fight their entire lives against things that will not change, cannot change. This is a book by David Rico, The 5 Things We Cannot Change. I'm just going to tell you what the 5 things are, but in this case, we all face them, and we all face them together. First of all, everything, including us, changes and ends. It's going to happen. Things do not always go according to plan. Life is not always fair. I'm still trying to convince my 11-year-old of that. Pain is a part of life, and people are not loving and loyal all the time. Get used to it. This is the life we're living. Embrace it. Evaluate whether some of those things can be changed. What you can't change, accept it. What you can change, do something about it. That's what an empowered optimist will do. Okay, wrapping it up. The past is gone. It's over. So many of us dwell on the past. The future isn't here yet. Every moment in the past, every moment in the future was always a present moment. The present moment is the only thing we have control over. Embrace the present moment. Be aware of the present moment. We spend so much time dwelling on the past and the future that we don't ever give the present its due course. It's the most important of the 3. It's where changes can be made. Change your own mental headlines. They don't have to be all negative. We are all perceiving a vast reality. Okay? As bad as it seems, there is so much good in this world. This is the optimist talking. But focus on those things from time to time. Give yourself a break. It's time to choose. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kainer.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Quick question for you.
Sure.
Is there any downside to being optimistic?
Well, I think if you can take anything too far, too much of a good thing. Being a blind optimist, I mean, Candide wrote Voltaire, and Voltaire had Dr. Pangloss in it. And Dr. Pangloss kept talking about the best of all possible worlds. And this was actually a philosophical way that he dealt with the problem of evil. And basically, the problem of evil was resolved, if you will, by saying that this has to be the best it can be, because otherwise a loving God would never allow this to happen. And actually, Candide was sort of a satire on that. But the blind optimist, actually the word Pollyanna, is sometimes used to refer specifically to the blind optimist. So I guess the answer I give to that is that too much of a good thing isn't necessarily a good thing.
And also, is being optimistic similar to just having low expectations? You expect to be dead. Anything beyond that is a bonus.
It's a blessing. It's a blessing. Well, I guess that comes down to, even though I kind of oversimplified it and talked about the fact that we can focus on what we can't control and focus on the things we can control, I would posit it that you can control a lot more than you might think. And so if low expectations, if you think that you can only change just the smallest fraction of things, but I don't believe that. I think that the history of innovation has been fueled largely by people who are wildly optimistic, people who have these so-called BHAGs, the big, hairy, audacious goal. And so the fact is, dream big. We've heard today about being ready to fail, letting failure be your teacher. It's okay to fail. If things were easy, it would have been done already. But big dreams is where big solutions start.
One last question.
Sure.
Is there an upside to pessimism?
Upside to pessimism. Well, I think it balances out us optimists. I think that what you need is, if you really want to solve big problems, you need teams of people, and you need leadership teams set up in such a way that people's strengths and weaknesses cancel each other out.
There's an average.
We can all be average. That's right. No, there's a wonderful lady who works with me at the college, and I like to call her the lady who keeps me employed, because I'm the guy who thinks these big dreams, and I certainly am not always the person who dots the I's properly and crosses the T's properly. But when she sees me slipping up, she is making sure that I get all my paperwork resolved and that kind of thing. So, you need a little pessimism. I wouldn't go so far to say pessimism, Okay, but I'd say realism.
Realism.
Yeah, and it's kind of a moderate pessimism, if you will. So, yeah, but a balance, a balance.
Thank you, Dr. Kainer.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.